DAW controllers like this bad boy, the FaderPort 16 from Presonus, are awesome, but are they right for you? Do you need one? And if so, which one would be right for you? So in today's video, I want to walk through 3 questions that you should ask yourself before you go and buy a DAW controller, so you know if you need one at all, and if so, which one is the best fit for you. The problem that I see is that a lot of people on YouTube are either best case just doing a standard review, which is nice, it shows you the features, but it doesn't necessarily help you understand how that would work into your workflow, or worst case, they're just trying to sell you the most expensive thing and they don't really care a whole lot about whether it's actually a good fit for you. They just want you to buy the most expensive thing. Now, if you don't already know me, I'm Colin. Welcome to the band guide. And before we get into the 3 questions, I just need to clear something up really quick. This is an example of a DAW controller. This is the FaderPort 16 by Presonus. And it might look like a live mixing console, but this is not a live mixing console. As you can see, there's no inputs or outputs here. It's literally just faders and other buttons to control different parameters inside your DAW. So this is not your interface. This isn't going to process the audio in any way. It's just giving you control over your DAW, basically bringing that physical world and mixing back together. So you're not only ever working inside your computer, but you actually have a physical touch to the mixing process. It can also help with the recording process because a lot of DAW controllers like this one give you what's called transport controls. So I have a record button and a play button and a stop button, a loop button. I have all control over all that stuff, and I can scroll around inside my session. So it can also just give you tactile feel in the recording process as well. It's not necessarily all about mixing. But okay, let's go ahead and jump into question number 1, which is, are you ready for a DAW controller? If you're just starting out, you don't need a DAW controller. The reality is there's a lot to learn about just basic recording and mixing that's going to help you much, much more than getting a DAW controller. Now that said, I'm not going to deter you. They are fun and they can help with studio workflow. So getting one isn't necessarily going to be a bad investment. But if you get it and you have no idea how it's going to fit into your workflow and where you're going to use it in the mixing process, if you're going to use it in the mixing process at all, then there's a good chance it's just going to end up gathering dust on your desk. I just got an email from someone from my email list saying, yeah, I got one of those and I have no idea when or how I'd use it, so it just sits on my desk. And I totally feel that because I actually did something similar when I was starting out. It was one of the first purchases I made was to get a little DAW controller. And I just didn't use it that much. Over time, once I understood how I would use it in the process, then I actually started incorporating it a lot. So it's not necessarily a bad investment, but it's not something that you need. If you don't really understand how to get a great recording, how to mix your music, then I'd focus your energy on really learning those skills, practicing those skills, because we don't get better just from learning, but practicing those skills. And over time, you'll start to say, oh, you know, if I could just hit one, always have one button in the same place for record, one button in the same place for stop, rewind, whatever, then that would be really helpful when I'm recording it. If I had a fader for writing automation and a pan knob for writing automation, that would be helpful in the mixing process. And you can see how you would use that, then a DAW controller might be the right move for you. But if you don't even know what I mean when I say a volume fader and a pan knob and automation and all that stuff, then it's probably not the right time to get a DAW controller. Now, if it is the right time and you feel excited about the idea of having a more tactile feel to recording to mixing, as I said, always having one button for record and pause and play and rewind and start and stop, all that stuff, and you want to have some faders and maybe even some plug-in control, then it's time to figure out what goal do you want a DAW controller to accomplish for you. There's 3 main types of DAW controllers, and different types of controllers are going to focus on different things. So the first type is fader control. The second type is transport control. This is moving around in your session, starting and stopping recording, playing, pausing, all that stuff. And then the third is plug-in control. Now with fader control, there's single faders that are just going to be great for writing automation at the end of the mixing process. And then there's multi-faders like, again, this FaderPort 16 that give me a whole bunch of different faders. So when I'm setting my levels at the beginning of a mix or even while I'm recording, I can quickly just adjust my levels. And then I can also automate all the individual tracks on here. Now, I'm only able to do that because this has motorized faders, meaning that it's going to learn every little motion that I do here. Motorized faders may not seem like a big deal, but they are crucial. If you want to have fader control, you need to get something that has motorized faders, because otherwise there's a total disconnect between what's happening on your controller and what's going on in the software. So they're just not going to really behave appropriately. When it comes down to it, I'd rather have one motorized fader than a whole bunch of not motorized faders. They're basically pointless. But one motorized fader can be great for doing automation. It's not as good for setting levels at the beginning of your mix, because then you just be going through each individual track and setting it with one fader. Just a little bit awkward and cumbersome. I thought I would do that originally with the first just single fader port, but I just found that I wasn't. But I would use it all the time for writing automation at the end of the process. So it can be really, really key for this. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about at all here, I have a 6-step checklist that just goes through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have. There's a link in the description below where you can grab it for free. But really, I think about it broadly as the first step is setting all your individual volumes, and then your last step is doing automation. And a lot of automation is going to be kind of right in your fader levels, making sure that everything's sitting perfectly at every point throughout the song. So fader control is really, really great. That's clearly kind of the option that I went with, was prioritizing fader control, because I wanted to be able to mix all my individual channels here on the main faders, and then I can automate them at the end of the process as well. Now, the second type is transport control, and as you can see, this has that built in as well, so I can start and record and stop and go forward and back and loop regions and all that stuff. I have all that control built onto this as well. It's very common to have fader control and transport control built into one unit. It's not as common to have plugin control and transport control built into one unit, but there are new units like the CS12 by Nectar that just came out very, very recently that kind of has a little bit of everything. It has a single fader for automation, it has transport control built into it, and it has a little bit of plugin control. And if you're working with Logic, it's specifically built to match and map with Logic, which is really cool. But some other great controllers with single faders and transport controls are the fader port, just a single fader port by PreSonus, the X-Touch 1 by Behringer, the UC1 by SSL, and then there's the bigger brothers like the X-Touch from Behringer and the fader port 8 or fader port 16 like I've shown you here today from PreSonus. Now, we should go and talk about plugin control, that third type of control, but really quickly before we do, this video is not sponsored by any sort of manufacturer, so I can just give my honest, unbridled opinions about these different controllers, but it is sponsored by Sweetwater. And if you don't know Sweetwater, they are the best company to buy gear from for dozens of reasons, but one that's really important if you're thinking about a controller, there's obviously a billion little switches and buttons and all that built into these controllers, and they can fail at some point. The best companies, they still will have something go wrong at some point. And Sweetwater has their own 2-year protection plan where they will fix it for you. They have in-house certified repair unit, and if they need to send it off to the manufacturer, they'll take care of that for you for the first 2 years that you own the piece of gear, which is awesome. It's kind of like an extra warranty that other companies charge you for, but they do it all in-house. They take care of it all for you. So if anything goes wrong, you know that you're covered, which is awesome. Now, Sweetwater is sponsoring this video. Thank you so much to Sweetwater. If you decide to pick up a DAW controller or need anything else, whether it's a guitar or guitar picks or strings or whatever, if you use my link in the description below, it won't cost you any more, but a very small amount will come back and support me in this channel so I can keep putting out videos like this, and it will signal to Sweetwater that, hey, we appreciate that y'all do this so that we can get honest thoughts and feedback and reviews from people on this gear, so that people aren't just telling you to go out and buy the most expensive thing when it's not necessarily going to be the best thing to serve you. So if you decide you want to get a controller or anything else, just use the link in this video or any of my videos, and a small part of that will come back and support me in this channel. Okay, let's talk about that third type of control, plugin control. Now, plugin control, we're talking about controlling the plugins in our software, so our EQ, our compressors. This isn't going to print things to the tracks. It's just going to give us that tactile control during mixing in the real world, but inside our software. So it's kind of, again, a hybrid approach. That's pretty neat. Now, there's some great plugin control focused controllers like the Console by Softtube or UC1 by SSL, or that new Nectar CS12 that I mentioned earlier. Those are all great options that give you that plugin control. I think these are great. They're certainly very appealing to me. I have yet to own one. I'll just say it. My hang up on them is that I just feel like it's something else I'm going to have to learn, and that it might end up slowing me down more than speeding up the process. Something like this fader port, it's very easy for me to see how and where I'm going to use it in my mixing workflow. But with plugins, I'm often pulling up a new plugin, playing around with it for a while, maybe trying out a different plugin. And if I am going back and forth between touch and inside the software, I just feel like that's going to slow me down. But I'm very intrigued by them, and I'm definitely holding out the possibility that I might end up getting one before too long. But right now, I think fader control is something that is a priority for me and my style of mixing and workflow. So to go back to our question, what goal do you want your controller to accomplish? Do you want it mostly for setting your volumes, in which case you're going to want one with multiple faders? Do you really just want it for automation? A single fader might be good for that. Are you going to use it during the recording process? Do you want kind of that start-stop functionality where you always have a button dedicated to that? Or are you wanting it for plug-in control? Admittedly, plug-in control is going to be the longest part of the mixing process, so maybe that's really what you're looking for from it. And our third and final question is, how much space do you want it to take up? Now, this might feel a little obvious to you. It should have probably felt obvious to me, but it's just something I hadn't really thought about till it came time for me to really get a controller. And I hadn't even thought about measuring my desk, measuring the amount of space I might have that I could dedicate to it before it's going to start getting in the way. And for me, I really prioritized having several faders. So I was thinking, okay, I really want to have 16 faders so that for the most part, I could have all my faders laid out in front of me. And at the end of the day, this FaderPort 16 was the smallest 16 full faders. So I felt very strongly that for my space, for my current setup, this was the best controller for me right now. But what is it that you're looking for? Do you just have a little bit of space? Maybe you really just want a single fader and transport controller, like the single fader port or the UC1 from SSL or the Behringer X-Touch 1. Any of those that are just a single, they're going to take up a lot less space. Or do you want an ecosystem that could evolve over time? Do you want multiple ones that are designed to fit next to each other? You want to be intentional about the space that you have. Setting up a comfortable recording studio that's really focused on the things you do the most is going to be more beneficial. So if you get something that's dedicated to plug-in control, but you spend 90% of your time just recording, then you're going to have something that doesn't get used a whole lot compared to something that's smaller and maybe just does transport control and volume automation when you need it, not taking up as much space on your desk. So think about how much space you really have to dedicate to it, and then figure out which is the best option for you. Maybe you have plenty of space, that's not a concern at all, and you want to go with a bigger option that really feels spread out so you don't feel kind of claustrophobic into a smaller area. Again, there's no bad option really in 2024 as long as you're going with a name recognized brand and you're ordering through a company that you trust, like Sweetwater. Then you're not going to get something that's no good. So it's more about matching the right product to your specific need and circumstances. And then with that, how much space do you want to dedicate to it? Now, if you want me to review any more specifically, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what people are thinking about getting. I'd love to do a more formal review. If you want me to do a full review of this FaderPort 16, I'd be happy to do that as well. I've really enjoyed mixing with this, by the way. I think it's really fun to get that tactile feel. As I said, I mostly am using this at the start of my mix and at the end, but I think as I record more songs with it, I'll also be using it just to pull faders up and down and kind of tweak levels as I'm recording, and having that quick access to it, I think is going to be really fun. Again, if you use my Sweetwater link down in the description below, it's not going to cost you any extra. Small portion will come back and support me, whether it's to get a DAW controller or something else completely. I really appreciate your support, and thanks so much again to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you thought about a controller for your DAW? If so, which one do you think would be right for you? Let me know in the comments below. If this video was helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another video.